This meeting is being recorded.
Whoa, there was an echo there, but good morning. I heard it twice. I heard her voice twice. Good to see all you guys. And well, I've noticed quite dramatically, I mean, the sun is up right now. There's hope again. We're moving into the summer season. I really enjoy that. But anyway, good morning. Today's date is April 20th, week after, or actually we celebrated Easter last Sunday. What a wonderful day. But let's get started with our study. Go ahead, Dave. Dave, do you have a comment about Easter or something?
Yeah, real quick. You said the sun up, and it's really nice. Yes, it's the S-O-N. The sun is up.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah, I didn't make that correlation, but you sure did. That's true. The sun is up. Boy, and that makes all the difference, Dave. I was thinking about that. There's not a lot of good. There's not a lot of good news floating around right now. You know, with what's happening in the Ukraine and all that, it just grieves me of what's going on. But the sun is up, and that makes all the difference. Let's go ahead and get started here with our review. Last time, you know, we're looking at this interaction with the blind man, the religious temple leaders, and Jesus is involved. And it's really, really telling from my perspective, and the perspective that I'm utilizing for my work and interpretation is really from a transformative perspective. What difference does it make in our lives? And that's really a driving question in a lot of how I think, and so it's what we're looking at here. This interaction with Jesus, what difference does it make? And that's what we're looking at. And going way back to week one, that I'm just seeing that word jungle that's actually now kind of invisible, but it's on every slide. Jesus is involved in a daily basis within what we've labeled as the jungle. And he is the one, as we're going to see in chapter 10, the door, the way, and he's interacting with various subjects within this jungle. And we're learning a great deal about ourselves and about our society. I created this idea of a fear vacuum, and that's what we looked at last week. And it's just a way for me to understand. I think in pictures, I think in images. And so I created this image that we looked at, which was basically a horizontal tornado of a fear vacuum. And the idea, the underlying belief is that unless I allow myself to what I'm calling including the negative, and it's illustrated by the man born blind. This is all in the context of the transformative experience in our lives. Unless I include the negative, I can't be changed, because I will continue just as I am. I am stuck. And this idea of including the negative is really terrifying to all of us as human beings, because we oftentimes perceive it as evil, and I prejudge it way prematurely. And therefore, I don't enter in and learn from what it has to teach me. It's never easy. And that's what the difficulty is, much of the difficulty that we see in the text. One way I can include the negative, as illustrated here, is through what we're calling necessary entering. And that goes back to our illustration where the man born blind actually goes in and experiences, identifies with the leaders. And I'm calling that a necessary entry. My common response is to protect myself, to shield myself, to armor myself, and not enter in and engage into what's before me. I've done it for a good chunk of my life. And that keeps me, it stunts my growth. But as I am able to trust and to let go and enter, one result of that is growth as a human being. And of course, to become more like Jesus. We then discuss some ways in which necessary entering can appear within our day-to-day experience. And we bantered that around as a group for about 30 minutes last time. We're going to move on to 26 through 34. This is a fairly large chunk. And if I could I ask one of you guys to read that either off the screen, if you're able, or from your text in front of you, whichever you wish. I don't care the translation. So would one of you read that?
Yeah, I'd be glad to read it, but I want to put in there, he said, I told you already. Can I throw verse 11 in there so we have a reference?
I lost you.
Okay, well, they said, we told you already. I want to make sure we know what he told them already. Verse 11.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, verse 11, they said, how are your eyes open? He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and I can see.
Okay, all right.
So Jesus's word is already out there, but he still doesn't know who he is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this is the second time around.
Right.
Yeah.
So they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become his disciples, do you? They spoke abusively to him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he's from. The man answered and said to them, well, here's an amazing thing. You don't know where he's from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know God does not listen to sinners, but if someone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. Since the beginning of time, it's never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born entirely in sins, and yet you are teaching us, and they put him out.
Wow,
I love this guy. Yeah, he's cheeky.
Yeah, I love this guy too. I love what he's teaching me. And I love the way you read it. Thanks, Bill. That's just really the spirit of it as far as, from my perspective.
Yeah.
So I start now in 26 through 27, and I named this little section toe to toe because I think of this man as actually going toe to toe, not for any evil purpose, but out of sheer confidence in what has occurred to him. And he's going toe to toe with these very important individuals within their community. He said to them, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And then the man answered, I told you already, and you don't listen to me. You don't want to become his disciples too, do you? I mean, he's using some sarcasm there. This man, and to put it into perspective, he's a former blind beggar. He is the lowest of the low in their society. And he's standing before these well-decorated, I'm sure they're well-decorated, well-recognized, very sophisticated temple leaders. He's standing before them, and he is simply not intimidated. And he's actually seeing them for the first time, which is kind of interesting. In my opinion, he has entered, like we looked at last week, he's gone into the fear vacuum. He's done this necessary entering, but he's free and he's able to exit out, not get sucked in through their intimidation. He's able to leave that after he has entered. That's really important. And it's demonstrated because he's engaged. He is focused in on this conversation. He's not pushing him away. He's not making excuses. He's not apologizing. He is actually moving in a very engaged conversation with them. And I think that's what's being demonstrated. He's able to exit because he's responding from a much deeper and safer space. He feels safe. And that space is the reality of his own transformational experience. That is what he's leaning upon. That is so interesting. It's not a theological revelation. It's what has happened to him personally. Someone last week mentioned the idea, I think it was Carl. Carl's in. Hi, Carl. Carl
good morning.
talked about his testimony, and that is what has made all the difference. The fact is, this man, formerly blind, now he sees. He can see, and that has made all the difference. He sees in more ways than one. He sees clearly, so therefore he speaks clearly. Boy, that is so important. He is clear in his sight. He is clear in his speech. He's speaking from a position of freedom, which we'll look at and we'll reference again in just a moment. Jesus has talked about freedom. And thus, he has the internal confidence to question the leader's motive. This whole slide is just, how is he able to respond in this manner to these people, which are by their very presence intimidating? And that is because he's speaking out of a very secure position based on what has occurred to him. He now sees. Response of the leaders. They spoke abusively to him. Notice abusively. You are his disciple, but we, in contrast, are the disciples of Moses. We have the word. We have the security of the Old Testament scriptures. We have everything that we are relying upon, is what they were saying. We could put that in a very similar context today. You are there, you are out, we are in. We know that God has spoken to Moses. We know that because we say so. But as for this man, we do not know where he is from. This is their response. His clarity is countered by what I'm calling a very fragile self-bolstering. I use that term many times, a self-building position designed to intimidate. It's what I have often done myself, and it's what I see happen around me all of the time. We can almost picture the white knuckling of their fists, their overstressed neck veins near bursting, and it is absolutely enraging to them that they can't control this man. His response is actually intensifying their anger. And I can see it. They are resorting to what they have always resorted to, and that's intimidation and abusive language. The leaders see themselves and are quite comfortable. You know, they view that, Bob, I think we talked about this last week. I'm thinking of the pyramid, because I think you cited this, that if the leaders see themselves quite comfortably on the top of the pyramid, they've gone through all the necessary things that they have defined, and they are quite comfortable in their position as they are. And they see themselves as judge. They don't see an alternative. From their perspective, their knowing and their not knowing is the determining factor. They are the judge. They are the ones stating what is and what is not. And they don't have the grid to think alternatively, like, what is missing from this picture? Not on their grid. The leaders, this is my little note, the leaders restate their position because this is their collective basis, like we just already talked about. They're in this top of the pyramid club, and they are there encouraging and supporting each other's biased position. That's their collective bias, their basis. This is all they know. And the reason is, it's because this is all they've allowed themselves to know. They are where they are because they have put themselves there, and they wish to stay there because they feel they are very comfortable. And here they are standing in the very presence of the Almighty God becoming flesh, and they don't question whatsoever their own position. Now, what is true of them is so very true of a person like myself. And I think all of us is this so being self-assured. We go on, and I labeled this 30 through 33 as fully human. In contrast, now we saw the response of the leaders. Now we go back to the man. And it says, the man answered and said to them, well, here's the amazing thing. You know where he is, you don't know where he's from, and yet he opened my eyes. And then I think he enters in verse 31 into their world. He is probably quoting the very things that he has heard his life, throughout his life in synagogue, of how do we as God's chosen people interact with society. And this would be what he has heard through a rabbinic response. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but here's the but. Sinner is a person in their mind who's well-defined. It would be a person who they've spent a lot of time defining what a sinner is, and it would be one who is not one of them. But he says, if someone is God-fearing and does his will, I'm sure the leaders had made some compensation to deal with reality of people who are outside of their faith, but yet who respond in a certain and appealing way. And so I'm sure they're being quoted here, that God doesn't hear sinners in their minds, but he listens to the person who is God-fearing. They probably got a long definition about that. Verse 32, since the beginning of time, it has never, here's his point, it has never been heard, no one has opened the eyes of a person born blind. And then he pops the question back to them. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Kind of a rhetorical response back. This former blind beggar, who is now set free, and then I put in there as Jesus promised in verse 32 and 36. And that is really my perspective, and that's how he is responding out of what we're seeing as freedom. He's unintimidated. We talked about that. He's speaking and he's sounding, in my opinion, just like Jesus. I think he sounds just like Jesus here. And he sees as Jesus sees, both physically and in a spiritual sense. He sees reality at this moment. Thus, he speaks as Jesus speaks. I think it's really interesting, the logic and his argument. I think sounds just like Jesus. I don't know what the text looks like, in the original, but in the English, I could see Jesus saying and using this same argument. He sees just like Jesus sees. He speaks like Jesus speaks. He's responding at this moment from what I've labeled as the mind of Christ, from the center of the circle. This is what it can look like, is to respond with the mind of Christ. He has got so much clarity and so much picture of what is going on. He can respond as he's responding, which is extremely clever. He's not operating under any kind of restraint. He's not trying to win their favor. He's not speaking out of anger, although I would guess it's kind of hot. But he's demonstrating what freedom can look like, which is also what it means with freedom. I'm correlating at this point freedom that Jesus promised with what it means to be fully human. Here's a belief that I have, that Jesus, fully God, fully man, is teaching us through his demonstration what it looks like to be fully human. So that, in my mind, is kind of an end goal in his responsiveness to the people. He is guiding and showing what it looks like. Otherwise, of course, we're human beings, but we see people operating from different biases. And I think those biases keep me from demonstrating what it means to be fully human at that very moment. At this moment, this man is showing us what it looks like. And then I've got the components of being fully human. I've listed some here. He's able to engage fear. My typical response is to ignore it, to blame others, to speak louder. I've come up with all kinds of mechanisms to avoid the own fear that's residing within me by trying to place the blame and the focus on someone else. He doesn't do that. He engages, he enters into that vacuum, but because of his basis of what has occurred, he receives his sight. He's able to exit. And this is demonstrated through his engagement. Acknowledgement of current belief. I pull that where he says last week, he says, I don't know if the man's a sinner or not. He is free to state what he doesn't know. He says, but let me tell you about my experience. Once I was blind, but now I see. I think that is profound, because then again, I have found myself on numerous occasions having to defend or justify or make excuses for what I don't know. And I tend to dig myself in deeper when there's no reason to do that. There's no reason whatsoever. If I don't know, I don't know. And I'm sure that we all have probably positive examples and negative examples of where that's true. I'm free to acknowledge what I do know and what I don't know. Go ahead, Bill. I'll stop here. And what do you have a response on that?
Yeah, it's interesting that he says, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But in the discourse or the exchange between these people, he comes to the realization he's not a sinner. He says, we know God doesn't listen to sinners, but he's sort of, it's not contradictory. I think in the dialogue here, he's starting to get an awareness of what's happened.
Oh, I think he's very aware. I agree.
It's because it's kind of like the kid's Sunday school. Jesus lets me this, I know, because the Bible tells me so. It's so simple, but you can throw that in the face of a lot of theologians.
Yeah. I see reason. Bill, what you're talking about is reasoning here, clarity in his talk. I think he's quoting from the rabbinic's position. He's taking their position when he goes into this whole thing. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. He's quoting them from their way of thinking, but they've made this provision. I think it's marvelous, the logic and how he's leading them through engagement, being involved in their own world, going into their own world, engaging in their own discussion. I don't think he's trying to prove anything I don't think he's trying to, it's not a mind game here. It's just, he's speaking out of such clarity of what has really occurred that they're in denial of.
And he's realizing they're offering him nothing. I mean, this is not a hard decision.
Describe that.
I mean, in all this whole conversation, what are they offering the guy? Jesus gave him a sight. What are they offering him? Reality, truth, something. He's going to why should I listen to you?
Well, I think that's how he's thinking, Bill. But in their minds, they think they're offering him everything, and that is that offering to him is being able to be included.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Their iron. That's their hammer, because at the end they're going to kick him out.
Yeah,
that's the way they think. That's what it's like to be on top of the pyramid. We need to judge him and kick him out.
That's the Reformation.
I think it was a bigger deal to them than it was to him.
Yeah.
Although Jesus does go to him. I mean, it's just so fascinating. Okay, then reasoning. I see reasoning in an amazing way, and he's able to derive a logical outcome, and that logical outcome is, guys, you tell me. This has never happened before. What is your explanation? It's just amazing. They don't have one. So then verse 34, they answered him back, and notice they are not engaging. This is what it looks like to not engage a conversation. You were born entirely in sins. They take this whole thing and they put it right back to him. I could see it happening where they're standing in this thing and they point their fingers and say, you're the sinner. You're entirely in your sins. And yet you're teaching us, how absurd, you sinner, teaching us who are at the top of the pyramid. And so they took the big hammer and they put him out. It means they kicked him out of it. They kicked him out. We scratch our heads, but yet we don't scratch our heads. It's so human. The leaders respond yet another time. From yet another time, all they know. This is all they know. They got a one-string guitar. They're motivated entirely from their untransformed, self-created, and I'm calling it, they're responding out of layer 3. I've devised this model, not, it's not out of my head. There's several people talk about this, but they look at him as, they look at Jesus as intimidating. They want to get rid of, they don't want anything to do with him because they are threatened by him and what he does. Now they're being threatened by this man. And what is being threatened is their power, their place in the pyramid. They view what has occurred as a personal threat. Thus, all they know to do is get rid of him, kick him out. And I think it's power. When they're layer 3, goes unsatisfied, I'm identifying with layer 3. They respond like this. Here's their response. Commentary on verse 34. Number 1, there's 3 things. They do a direct attack on his personhood. Guys, I have done this many times, and it's been done to me many times. We all have stories. A direct attack on his personhood. You are born in sin. And there's the quote. Number 2, I'm using that word bolstering, means to build up, fluff up their chest, and it's all from their self-constructed importance. It's all in their own heads. Yet you are teaching us you have no right, is what they were saying. And what they do is they punish the dissenter. Notice direct attack, puffing up their own position, and the only thing they have is punishment. And so they punish the dissenter. In their mind, he's not a dissenter, but they think he is. And so this is so human. This idea of forced separation. You can't be like us, so we're going to kick you out. We don't like how you respond. It's too uncomfortable. They wouldn't say that. We want you out of here. Forced separation is the human method employed right here when one feels powerless. I think it's not from a powerful position, it's from a powerless position, or a perception of powerlessness. The leaders are not able to control the outcome, so they kick him out. And, oh, good, we got 30 minutes. In what ways, let's talk about forced human separation. This is what we see happening in the text. They're forcing him out. Why? I'm scratching my head. How have you guys seen it? How have you seen this forced human separation? Maybe you've been a perpetrator, maybe you've been a receiver, or maybe it's happened around you. How have you seen this employed? And primarily, we're connecting this to this inability to control. There's a high need to control. Someone is not compliant, and so we boot them out. Wow, that has so many applications, a ton of applications. Let's talk about it. What are your thoughts? Vince, you're smiling.
It's come up because of Facebook. I have the opportunity to get together, on the internet with people from my past, and many of them were from the Way International.
Yeah.
And memories come up that they share. And one of the problems with the Way ministry, and much like a lot of other ministries, the Way was my experience, but it's not unique to them. The leadership of the Way got pretty heady with power and unchallenged authority, so they became literal rapists and adulterers and just psychopaths. I mean, they were just crazy with their lust and using people, but it was all hidden. And the guy like me, for example, I'm just living my life in Iowa somewhere. I didn't even know this was going on until you hear the stories. And so what happened, people that were subordinates of the leaders, that were the scripture people, started to write essays and theses and on why adultery is wrong and why what they're doing is wrong. It's from the Bible, so that they can address these people and reprove them according to the word. The leader's response was, anyone who reads these letters are out of the way. You can't fellowship with us anymore. It wasn't what they're saying is wrong. It wasn't, this is their opinion, hear mine, come to an agreement yourself, you're adults. It became, you can't read it. And if anybody is found to be in possession of these papers, it's almost like a Martin Luther Roman Catholic Church scenario. You know, if you're in possession of any of these papers, we're going to shun you and you're out. And, you know, some of these people, you know, to be out of the way was not like leaving, you know, Council Tree Covenant Church, you know, there's another one half a mile away. This is, if you're not in the way, you moved for nothing.
You're not in the way.
You really, it's a big deal. I mean, you know, it does, unless you're experienced it, you don't recognize the reality, I think. But a lot of these people sold their homes to move to where the way was. A lot of these people postponed their educations to go out and witness, and, you know, these church things. So when they say you can't be a part of what we're doing anymore, it's like leaving, you know, Hewlett Packard or something. That wife you married from Hewlett Packard and the picnics that you've enjoyed for 20 years, you can't come anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, this is my whole life. You kidding? The only reason I live in Fort Collins is because of Hewlett Packard. Now you're telling me I can't hang out with anybody? Yeah. You're out.
So there's two, your
huge.
example, Vince, let me comment, your example is absolutely correlates with what we see. And what happened in your case happened in the 20th century and is probably still has ramifications in the 21st century.
Right.
I mean, we're
It's
talking
still-
2000 years and it's right. This is exactly what's happened. There are two aspects, at least two aspects. One is the effect on the person who receives notification. I can't come to the picnic anymore. I can't be involved. That's a devastating blow. The second is what on earth happened to these leaders? And can you comment on one or both of those? You know, these leaders, I can't buy the fact that they were evil and they were trying to thwart this whole thing from the very beginning. They became what they became over time, as far as, at least from my perspective. What are your thoughts on that?
You're talking to me?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
in the case of the way, because I knew these guys so well, they were evil from the beginning.
Oh, so they were.
They really were. It was very humbling to find out that I could be so fooled, and so many of us. I mean, it wasn't a small group. There was, you know, at times there were 80 to 100,000 people involved in this. And the guys that started it saw an opportunity to be rich and to be powerful and to lead a group of people that would not question them and just say yes, you know, and under the guise of you're doing the Lord's work. And so if you didn't get close to them, you thought you were doing, you know, you're just your basic evangelical preaching the Bible. But once you got to know these people and you went behind the curtain a little bit, you go, should you have a bottle of booze on the pulpit while you're preaching? I mean, is that comely? I mean, doesn't that seem wrong? Like, oh, no, nothing's wrong for me because I've been forgiven of my sins. God doesn't look at my actions. He looks at my heart, and my heart, it's got nothing to do with Drambuie. It's got nothing to do with, you know, drinking. So these guys were nut jobs from the beginning, but no one knew. And then once it was found out, and people tried to reveal what they found out, their strategy was as these leaders with the blind man. It's
Yeah.
like, you can't be a part of this anymore. Everything you knew in your life that made your life you is gone unless you comply.
Yeah.
That's it. All you got to do is comply, and you can get back to life the way you knew it. If you don't comply, you're going to start from scratch somewhere else that no one knows you. And that's a big choice for people to make. And that's what this guy's choice was. And what I thought of when I read, when Bill read it, so the emphasis was so real in his reading. These leaders are walking around the crowd thinking everybody's on their side, but they don't know the thoughts going through their heads. This guy had thoughts in his mind that he finally had the opportunity to say. And his thoughts were like, you guys are nuts. Jesus healed me. What the heck did you ever do to me? The only thing you ever did to me is leave me alone. But you never did anything positive. I just never got anything bad. And I'll sit here forever if it was up to you. But Jesus comes by and I'm healed and I can see, and I finally have the opportunity to say what I've been thinking all this time. And you can't do anything about it. And they went crazy.
They went crazy. Yeah.
I have a thought here, and that's Vincent, that's you. I just tangentially touched the way you got into it. But that I talked earlier about the benefit of this group. I have a comfort level here that you can venture some places and maybe come back, but you're not going to risk being expelled. You know, well, maybe someday you would, but you'd have to really be pretty awful. And to me, what happens here is instead of forced separation, there's self-separation. We've had people come in that looked at it and said, this isn't for me. And they self-separate, you know, and that's kind of interesting. It's not that we ever kicked anybody out. It's they just chose not to participate. Because we're a fairly, I don't want to use this word, liberal. We're a fairly accepting group of people. We're all from different churches, and we've all been through several church changes, but yet we stayed in this group for 30 some years. You know, that speaks well.
Yeah.
So Bill, we've been talking about putting you out, but we didn't really want that to come to light.
Let me know.
You didn't get that letter yet? What's going on?
No, I didn't. I watched my screen go blank and I realized, I'm done.
So have you guys, isn't this a long chapter? And doesn't it seem, I mean, it's a long story about a blind man, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of verses about, and you know, I'm thinking, why did John, when he wrote this, include this? So Mike, this idea of forced separation. So if we say what is it all about? It seems like it's about being blind, right? We got a blind man. And then we hear a lot about sinner. Who's a sinner? You a sinner? Well, I'm not a sinner, right? And they're going back and forth with this sinner thing. So I had this thought, like from God's perspective, sin. What sin is forced separation from God. And maybe sin at its core is this, I'm in control, me, it's all about me, right? My religion, my faith, me. So we get this sin thing. And then the question becomes, in terms of forced separation, like who is blind here? we got Jesus, we got the blind man, and we got the, the religious leaders, the Pharisees,
Yeah.
and his parents show up. But the big thing I hear is, well, who's really blind?
Yeah.
Metaphorically, you mean?
Well, yeah. And what's the effect of blindness? Is it sin? Is it being forced out? Or forced human separation? So our blindness, what does it do as we go through life? Do we force everybody else out if they don't see like we see?
Dave, do you have some comments there?
Yeah, I may be odd man out here, which would not be unusual.
We love you anyway.
You're right. It's a long chapter, and yet there are points where I wish Holy Spirit and John would have filled in a few blanks for, and I may drop off. My connection is really, internet's bad this morning, but I actually witnessed an example of obedience. If you go back to the beginning of the chapter, Jesus is walking by and sees this blind man. And he just tells him to go do such and such, and the man doesn't question anything. He gets up and does. And the fruits of obedience are many and are powerful and are motivation to get more and more of this Jesus who asked me to do this. And now look what has happened when I've been obedient. So it kind of back in written the sinning old, but it also points out that God's way is just. So whereas I don't disagree with the forced separation issue, I really see more of a testimony to obedience here. And this man who quote unquote was nothing finds himself empowered to be everything that God has intended him to be. And he's very comfortable walking in those shoes in front of these guys on their pyramid.
Tatsi, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, I identify with this totally, okay, in terms of the blind man. And the forced human separation that I personally underwent was getting fired, okay? Because obviously the president of the company didn't feel that, he couldn't control me in terms of the way I would treat this outside sales or sales type person or marketing person that was trying to interfere with the regulatory process, mainly because the president wasn't at that meeting. So he didn't see what was really going on. So later on, he did find out the truth that they ran into the same thing further on with the guy that replaced me. He underwent the same thing with this guy who was interfering. But for me, I identify with this blind man entirely because I was blind then. And, at the time, it was like my dark valley experience. Now, when I look back at it, I see, wow, if God hadn't intervened at that particular point for me in my life, I would have still been, not a believer and a prisoner to sin and not saved by Christ by being born again. So to me, this forced separation, for me, turned out to be a mountaintop experience rather than a bad experience. So anyway.
Yeah, I had to think about this. The guy,
Interesting. Yeah.
this guy had courage, and courage isn't a lack of fear. Courage is facing his fears, because Jesus is going to come to him to basically comfort him. I mean, he looks pretty cocky here, but the point is, he knows he has to say this, and he knows the results of it's going to be detrimental. You know, getting kicked out of the synagogue is no small thing.
Jesus does go to him. You know, you're correct. I agree with you, because Jesus goes to him and talks with him. He seeks the man out. He actually seeks the man out. I think it's the beginning of chapter 10.
Yeah.
Well, and Mike, what I see in this question here is what you see in politics today, or what you see in these hot button issues, is that people tend to, if you don't agree with their side of whatever issue it might be, the first thing they do is what these leaders did, and that's start calling you names. They can't argue with your side. They can't say,
Yeah.
you know, your belief is wrong. They just start calling you names. You're a bigot. You're hateful. You're whatever.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to have a discussion. They don't want to have their views challenged.
Mhm.
And we do the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know where everybody finds themselves on the left or the right of these issues, but I think both sides do it. So we in this country have not learned to have an educated discourse over issues. We simply revert to name calling and beating on people, and then finally we say, well, I'm not going to listen to you. You're out of the conversation. You're done. We're not friends anymore. We're not going to talk about this or whatever. That's where I see the forced separation is in these hot button political issues where there's no more discourse, and that's what these guys did. They said, "This guy's all he's doing is telling them what he knew." He said, "I was blind. Now I see." You guys know that somebody who is steeped in sin can't have done what happened to me, but they couldn't argue that. They just said, okay, we're done. You're out of here. So it's the same thing. Nobody wants to have any kind of intelligent discourse on any issue these days. That's what I see in this question.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good response, Jeff. I have noticed somebody just responded. Let me just say a quick thing here and then turn it back over. I have noticed that my tendency is to pull the trigger too quickly. And in so doing, I really miss what that human being has to offer me.
Mhm.
There's where my head is. They're missing out. They separate him. We want this guy out of here. The reason we want that guy out of here, because we really don't know what else to do. That's all they have. And so my response to this text is, gee, where have I been way premature and pulled the trigger to separate myself and really miss something there. Somebody else had something. Somebody was going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, isn't might not the core problem be sin? And so whether it be political or your latest argument with your spouse, isn't it, I'm right, you're wrong. It's about me. It's how I see things, right? And back in the beginning in the garden,
Yeah.
Adam and Eve decided to see things differently, right? Did God really say? I don't know, right? And so why not? And that sin caused them expulsion, God said, I'm going to separate you now. We got a separation going on here. You're out of here, just like this, right? And so our sin makes us blind. Jeff, I know you're not right. You know, you are
Yeah.
out of here, man, right?
Yeah.
You don't fit in with this group. You are challenging us. You are out of here. And Vince, I would say those guys probably were good guys when the thing started, as opposed to bad guys. And they probably had a good idea, and they wanted to be about God's kingdom. And somewhere along the line, you know, power corrupts, you know, the train came off the track, you know, and I don't really know that, but
Yeah.
the point is,
Pretty close.
it seems like a life experience to me, even with, how about us, right? Our journeys. Either we continue to deal with, I'm the blind guy, not you, right? And you're saying things I don't get. So maybe it's me, not you. And maybe I'm the one that needs to back up a minute and say, this whole thing started out with this conversation about who's a sinner. And this blind man did not ask to be healed, right? And Jesus, the conversation started by, you know, the disciples saying, well, who's blind here? Who caused this guy's blindness? And this guy was separated. When you are blind, you are separated from everybody else.
Yeah, that's true. He was labeled his entire life, John, as a sinner, because the disciples were asking Jesus a very common question. Well, who's guilty, his parents or him? You know, somebody's guilty.
Yeah.
Which is it? I mean, that would be a horrible thing to live under, and he lived under it.
Yeah.
But
wow.
what's so ironic is at the end of I'm working a couple weeks ahead, so I don't know where I am, either latter part of 9 or 10. I think it's right at the end of the chapter. Jesus, I think the last verses of this chapter, Jesus is going to endorse the idea of blindness. And he actually says to the leaders, it is their sense of unblindness that is actually separating them from God. They think they can see, but actually they're blind. So in a sense, knowing that's one blind, you know, when Tatsi was talking, accepting the idea that I am blind is actually the first part in rejuvenation, the first part of transformation, the movement in relationship with God, you know, however we want to cast it.
Yeah, I really like, Mike, where you said, how about that, right? So you got a blind man making these steps, and freedom and being reality, but his transformation, he didn't go off to college for 4 years and get transformed. Or his transformation, we're talking about his transformation all in this story.
Yeah.
And you made a comment that he is looking and sounding a lot like Jesus.
I think so.
Right. And so a lot of us on our spiritual journey, we would say the end is, I should look and sound a lot more like Jesus. And there we go off and we decide, well, I got to get a lot smarter about this. But somehow the blind man, right, there's a transformation that took place in this blind man. Right. Now, we don't know all about him before, but you're saying he's looking and sounding like Jesus. And I would say, well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
It could be. I was thinking, if you know that John Prine song, Hello in There, you know, he's talking about there's this guy you see every day, but there's a man in him that you don't see. And this guy, this blind man begging on the side of the road that people see every day, I would think you can go past him thinking there's nothing going on there. He's just a blind beggar. You know, there's nothing, no activity in his head. But when he has the opportunity to speak, you realize there's a person in there. He's got thoughts. He's got opinions. He's got knowledge. He suddenly has the confidence and the courage to say what's been on his mind all this time. And you know, people are startled by it, you know, and it makes me think, you know, I sit next to people at church and you go, you know, who's he? He doesn't know the words. He doesn't know anything. There's a person, there's a human being in there that's
The
got,
human being, yeah.
you know what I mean? He's got worth. He has substance.
Yeah.
And
So one
when
of
he
the-
opens his mouth
Yeah.
and says something, you go, oh my gosh, where'd that come from? Well, it's been there all the time. You never listen to
One of the things I've been really learning, Vince, is that everybody has a story,
him.
right? And we judge them, whether they be gay, homosexual, whatever the deal is, right? We quickly put them in a box and judge them, right? As opposed to saying, I wonder what his or her story is.
Yeah, and engaging. I've got one quick story, John and Vince. I didn't manufacture this. This did happen yesterday. I was up in the mountains and I walked back to my truck and there was a woman sitting there. It was a parking area kind of off the main road a little bit. And it was kind of a dilapidated truck, kind of pieced together, and she was sitting there, looked a bit disheveled, and it's not, let me just say, it's not a person I would naturally gravitate to have conversation with. I mean, you can do with that what you will, but I said to the woman, she was sitting on this rock watching the river, and I said, oh, you're enjoying the river today, huh? And she came back and said to me, oh yeah, it's reminding me of my husband. And right there, it totally changed. And I just expressed I said, I am so sorry for the loss of your husband. I know that is really a rough time, but it turned one of those occasions of prejudgment and that I've been in numerous times into a very warm, engaging human interaction. Her response was, yes, thank you very much for your words, but this place really brings me to a much better place. And I said to her, that's wonderful. That's the kind of thing, Vince and John, yes, there's a human being, of course. The question I'm looking at, though, here this morning, and all of us, is how many opportunities can I grab hold of in order to engage in that in the years to come, rather than how many have I missed? Yeah, I've missed a great deal. But how can I be different and start looking like Jesus? To be Jesus, but you know what I mean. You go ahead, Bill. We're at 8:03. Go ahead and end it, and then we'll call.
I don't want to end it, but I don't want. I just watched this and I'm looking at, like, when you said, well, they weren't open to new things, and when you get to new things, well, when you're trying to learn, what do you lay down and what do you not? And I realized all of a sudden we get caught up in the what's right. Who knows the right thing? Where do we get the right thing? When should we change our opinion? And if you look at scripture, like, 1 Corinthians 13, read at weddings, or James talking about wisdom, it's all about the how to be compassionate, how to be kind, how to listen, how to submit. All these things come out of wisdom of God. Says, first of all, wisdom is kind, considerate, submissive. I mean, you submit to other people. So if we stay with the idea of the how is what's important and not get caught up in the what, that'll save us a lot of damage.
Yeah. What is it? I really like, we're going to end on this, Bill, but you said, what did you just, one of those moments.
It'll come to you at 2 a.m.
What are you willing to lay down? You said that.
Yeah, I said
That
submissive.
is exactly how I'm seeing necessary entering. I enter, but primarily what allows me to enter the negative, this necessary entering, is my willingness to lay down. I think that presupposes my self ability to go in. What am I willing to let go of? And I think that is good. We're going to end it there. 8:05. I don't want to keep you guys, but we'll get together next week. We'll be here and we'll continue with week 134. So thanks for the good discussion, guys. Some really great thoughts this morning. Like always, it's wonderful. Have a good week and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah.